Hello, welcome to this special briefing on nonprofits and vaccine acceptance. I'm Ben Kershaw. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations at Independent Sector. For those of you who are joining us for the first time on an IS webinar, welcome. Independent Sector is a national membership organization. We represent a diverse set of nonprofits, foundations, and corporate giving programs that are working to ensure all people in the United States thrive. As part of our webinar feature, your lines are muted. We'll pause periodically to answer questions, which we ask you to submit in the Q&A box. You can submit those questions anytime. If you have technical difficulties, please email publicpolicy@independentsector.org. This webinar will be recorded. It will be emailed to you next week. Before we start, I want to respectfully acknowledge I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. It's the ancestral home of the Piscataway people who are still in the area. They're working to reclaim their land and traditional practices. I also want to acknowledge many of the buildings and places we inhabit in Washington were built by enslaved people. Wherever you are joining us from today, we're really glad to have you. I'm lucky to be joined, as ever, by Wes Coulomb, our trusted partner and the managing director at Washington Council Ernst & Young. Wes and I, as well as our good friends, Sally Schaefer with Uncorked Advocates and Emily Horowitz with the American Heart Association, are going to unpack the latest legislative developments for you during the second half of today's program. But before we do that, we are honored to have with us two members of the Biden administration. Natalie Areola Maurice is a special assistant to the president, and she's the director for partnerships in the White House Office of Public Engagement. And Ivana Cancela is the Principal Deputy Director of Intergovernmental Affairs at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So I want to welcome our guests. And as I turn it over to Natalie, let me just thank the Biden administration for their clear desire to partner with the nonprofit sector. And we want to thank Natalie. I think this is day 15 or 16 for her. So she's certainly spent a lot of time digging in on the sector. I know our passionate audience will go easy on you, give you the new kid grace period. So Natalie, Ivana, thanks for being with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. And as Ben said, I'm the newly appointed Director of Partnerships at the Office of Public Engagement. It's really an honor to be with y'all today and to have some time to just, one, talk about our efforts, but two, have one of our colleagues from HHS join us to share to you more about funding opportunities that are available to us. I would like to start this conversation by outlining that this conversation is off the record. We would like to have us open up a dialogue as y'all as possible. If there are any members of the media or if any of you would like to share any of this content, either digitally or in a public manner, please make sure to check in with Jeff or us so that we can connect you to the right folks in our White House press office or digital team. So with that, I'm very excited today to talk about an opportunity that I hope y'all have already been hearing about, which is the We Can Do This month of action. The Office of Public Engagement, in close coordination with our Office of Political Strategy, HHS, and other partners, actually after a conversation that started with the independent sector about the need to make sure that not only are we creating big organizing opportunities for partners and constituencies across the country, but that we're also really taking time to acknowledge all the work that you all are doing in your local communities at a national level, as a macro, in the context of really the fact that our ability to get our country back to normal is really dependent on all of us, and our line of work and the day-to-day that you do in your local communities is really what's going to get us to President Biden's 70% of eligible adults vaccinated by July 4th. So I will quickly share just a quick top line presentation to walk through the month of action, and then I will turn it over to my colleague to talk a little bit more about some of the resources available. My apologies. Here we are. So the We Can Do This month of action is due to kick off on June 4th. And what it really is the Department of Health and Human Services is already working with a lot of you locally, but we really want to lean in a lot on public organizing local events that can take place, not just during this month. Obviously, y'all are doing this on a day-to-day, but we really want to concentrate and make sure that the country is organizing around this big goal that we have for July 4th, which is to make sure that we have 70% of eligible adults vaccinated by the July 4th deadline. What we're asking for is grassroots, person-to-person activities. I know as an organizer, a lot of us are really excited to be able to go out there to do some more of the traditional boots on the ground organizing that we're used to. But we really hope that we can count on your support in this month of action, which, not only does it give a big organizing opportunity for all of you to join us, but really, as I mentioned, it helps us really look at what's happening in every single community and tie it to a bigger national organizing effort that's happening nationally. So our big ask for you is, and our hope for you is that you can help us really plan out and map out and work in coordination with HHS and its partners to host on-the-ground person-to-person activity, either canvassing, text messaging, phone banks, in all of your networks in every single state. But there are definitely, some states where we have seen that there's a greater need to have in-person activity for the sake of moving a specific sector of the population. At the end of the day, this is about access, right? And making sure that people who want to get vaccinated have the information that they need to be able to access their local resources. And then obviously also building community trust so that those that are not confident or have questions can know how to access those resources locally through their appropriate health officials and community organizers. So I do quickly want to talk about some of this data that you see in front of you. As you all can see, there are some higher confidence states and lower confidence states. Just to be clear, the ask for activity is all around the country. There's not one community that's more important than the other by any means, but we have seen trends, and it'll be great for y'all to at least have visibility into some of what we're seeing. As you can see, there are some of the states here that we really want to focus on really have a high portion of the population that are still either considering getting vaccinated, right? Or just, it's a matter of just making sure that those that want to actually have access. So we really want y'all to consider these states as you're planning your organizing through your networks, because it's really important that we are at least aware of if resources already exist in those states that we can help amplify, or if there is anyone in your networks in these states or really in any states that need any resources to help move, especially this movable, more vaccine ready population. I think this is a great time. This month of action to really focus on those folks. Because as we said, at the end of the day, the only way that these folks, this last, 21% or so, the only way that they're going to get moved at the national level is really by hearing from local community members and health officials that they trust and that they know, so that they can actually make sure that they have access to those vaccines. Happy to talk through this data later. I know Ivana is definitely a lot more well-versed in this on her day-to-day, but we did want to make sure that you at least had top-line visits into these states in front of us so that you can consider them as you're looking into activating your respective networks. We're asking a lot from you, so we also thought about, how how can you help, right? Which is specifically, well, we definitely encourage all digital activity, all of the media activity, all the paid, advertising, and all those efforts that are happening throughout the states. We really do want to focus this month of action on mobilizations, right, and community mobilizations. So it would be great, and what we're asking for y'all to help us do is to get volunteers, either to host your events or to drive volunteers towards events that are already happening around the communities that are either being hosted by other partners or local cities or officials, which once you decide and you ask to join the month of action, we'll definitely be able to give you those resources. So we are also providing, and by we I mean Health and Human Services, they do have partners that are hosting national text banks, phone banks, digital storytelling, organizing trainings, and definitely community-led canvassing and boots on the ground, more traditional canvassing and flyering type of efforts, right? So HHS and their partners are making sure that they're setting up a structure that allows for easy plug-in of your volunteers or networks. If you choose or don't have that capacity to host your own event, and if you are hosting your own event, there also is capacity to open it up to a broader list of volunteers. So folks that are looking for something to do in their community that can easily plug into your efforts. Other resources, they will have materials available, right? Volunteer decks, canvassing, phone banking, toolkits, everything that you will need to pull together your event. Make sure that you connect with Jeff so that he can connect you to Ivana so that we can get you to the appropriate folks. Other support is trainings, one-on-one support, office hours. So there is an entire deck built in of support that can help you facilitate these. Quick timeline. So starting in June, we are going to be hosting trainings. June 2nd is where we're looking for a public rollout of sorts. 4th is the month of action, kickoff, which is the official kickoff. But that first weekend is really when we're looking for y'all to really activate your networks and really also just put your community on notice and saying like this month is the month that we really want you out there doing some of this canvassing and some of this work locally. Folks have talked about gathering people next to vaccination sites and flyering surrounding supermarkets, right? Just very local events that y'all already know how to do is really what we found to be most effective during this time. And then obviously, hopefully a July 4th celebration for all of us to join once we actually reach that goal. So in terms of next steps, I'll make sure that Jeff and Ben send these resources to you, but we would really appreciate your support here. It really is an exciting moment to also highlight all of the work that you're doing. And I will turn it over to Jeff. But before then, if you do want more information, you can go to wecandothis.hhs.gov.
Thanks very much, Dan.
Thank you, Ben.
Ivana, there are, we'll pause for questions, I think, in a moment, but in addition to digital and digital resources that are being provided by the administration to do this work, there's some other resources that nonprofits certainly need to tap into to advance this cause. We're really glad to have you here to maybe give us a snapshot of some of those as well.
Thanks, Ben. And yes, I see Steve's question in the chat, and it couldn't be a more perfect tee up to what I have to talk about. There are a number of different opportunities for nonprofits, community-based organizations to engage in the work of vaccine education, vaccine administration, and vaccine outreach. Some of them come through the federal government, many of them come through state governments. I'll talk about both as best I can, and will certainly provide my email address to be able to answer the organization-specific questions that may help you decide whether or not to follow up in actually applying for different funds. The American Relief Plan had a number of different funding opportunities for organizations. The ones I'll focus on today relate to $250 million that are set to go directly to community-based organizations to do vaccine education work. The money is administered through HRSA at HHS. Some of you may work with HRSA as partners in federally qualified health centers or in community clinics. HRSA has a robust network of both across the country. And the funds, it's about $250 million, are going out in two different batches. The first $125 million were set to go out in really designed for 10 large organizations that have a national footprint and that have a public health background. It's important to note that for the purposes of these dollars and the next ones I'll talk about, public health is really broadly defined. The intention is not to have that be a disqualifier. Rather, it's meant to be a way to narrow the kinds of folks who are thinking about this work. So for example, there may be, I don't know, let's take something like an auto aficionados organizations that across the country has members who are all about cars. They are national in scope and they are eager to get their car loving members engaged on vaccine outreach efforts, but they've never even talked about wellness or healthcare in their communities. They are probably not the right fit despite their eagerness and national footprint. Instead, organizations that have done things like hunger relief, have done things like Affordable Care Act outreach, have worked on public health initiatives very broadly defined, are more appropriate recipients of these dollars. It's also important to note that the way HRSA has structured these grants is as a cooperative agreement and not as a grant-grantee relationship. And that means that there is much more room for support from HRSA and other agencies at HHS as these grants, as the grant dollars get distributed. What we've learned over the last year and a half is that the situation related to the pandemic, related to vaccines, looks very different, sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes on a weekly, monthly, bi-weekly basis. And the cooperative agreement relationship allows for that flexibility to be embedded into the grant process, so that organizations that apply don't necessarily have to say, well, we would do X work in X state and be prepared to do something different the following week. But so those plans can really come together to meet the moment of vaccines and the pandemic. So 10 organizations, $125 million. That grant application has come and gone. Those dollars are set to be distributed by June 14th. I note them despite the application being closed because once those are announced, there may be opportunities for smaller nonprofits or smaller community-based organizations to reach out to national allies that are recipients of these dollars to become sub-grantees and to partner in the localized efforts. Some applicants I know were interested in applying with multiple organizations, and while I have no say in who recipients are, I won't even review an application. I know there's a lot of space for how those dollars can be sub-granted. So the second batch of 125 million is out now. That application is live, and we hosted our first webinar information session on May 25th. We will have another one next week and the following. Dates are pending, but as soon as I have them, I'll make sure that Ben and the team have them so they can get out far and wide. In the meantime, if you are, and I just taking a step back, so 125 million, these will go out to smaller organizations that have a more localized footprint that also have a public health background. And again, the same broad definition of public health applies. And applicants can ask for up to $1 million in these awards. So we anticipate that we will have between 100 and 150 recipients of these $125 million, with disbursements set to go out later this summer. We anticipate having a much bigger pool of applicants for these dollars, so there will be a longer time between when the application closes and when dollars go out than there was for the first batch of dollars. Once we, as you are thinking through whether or not it is worth your organization investing the time to apply for these dollars, the best place to get information and the best entity to contact is an email address that's attached to the NOFO. It's cbovaccineoutreach@hrsa.gov. I'll be sure to drop it in the chat as well. But folks who run that email address are incredibly responsive and will make sure that they help both in the troubleshooting and kind of guidance as you are applying, and can answer questions to help you determine whether or not this is an application worth pursuing. In addition, there are $3 billion that were dispersed through the Centers for Disease Control that went directly to states. 75% of those dollars have to be used have to be dispersed either to community-based organizations or state health departments to do vaccine outreach and education. So we've put together a toolkit that, to the best of our knowledge, has a contact sheet for the person in every state who is either administering or overseeing those dollars. So that if you are a nonprofit that has never worked with your state health department, you don't have to go through the process of calling everybody in the org chart before you get to the right person. And we would love feedback if you use this toolkit as to whether or not it was helpful, whether or not that person was the right person, because we're continually updating it to make sure this is a useful resource for community-based organizations. Even in the states where the decision is made to get those dollars just to health districts and not necessarily to community-based organizations, health districts have typically re-granted those dollars to community-based organizations. So you want to be sure that you are in touch both with state leadership and with health departments, health districts, whatever they're called in your state, because both may have avenues where you may apply for funds. We're here as a resource. So if you have specific questions about what's happening in your state, we can do our best to help get you answers, help point you in the right direction. Personally, and as an administration, there is a belief that those who are in community are some of the most trusted messengers, and polling and data backs this up. It says that people are more likely to get vaccinated when they hear from people like their local doctors, when they hear from community leaders. So these dollars and resources are important, not only in empowering you all to do your work, but so that all of us can do our part and get us through not only the July 4th goal date, but get us out of the pandemic. And I will put my email address in the chat for questions. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to do my best to answer them now as well.
Thank you so much, Ivana. I think that context that you've provided is really, really helpful. Certainly, I know to the folks that we have been hearing from about this NOFO and about these efforts. So again, we're grateful for it. And I know that others will ask questions as well. So as we turn to some of the Q&A, I have a question for Nat, and perhaps you can answer it if Nat is not with us. Awesome, thanks, Nat. So Nat, you mentioned the deadline for commitments being early next week. A lot of our listeners and viewers today are public policy people. We certainly can appreciate the value of being mentioned on a list, right, by the administration, by the White House for those commitments. Can you talk a little bit more about what those commitments are and what it would entail to get involved between now and Tuesday, I believe?
Yeah, definitely the sooner the better, right? In terms of your ability to make any commitments in terms of participation. But in terms of any public rollout that would be available to the press and just through HHS via listing of participants and partners, that July 2nd timeline is it. However, there will be ongoing opportunities to highlight work that's happening locally. So that deadline, it's a deadline in terms of when we expect for this to go live, but it's not a deadline in terms of a cutoff for activity, right? So I would encourage y'all, if you can plan around committing, not so much committing, but communicating to us a set of events that you want to host around that weekend of action or the month of action. We would appreciate it so we could include it in a public rollout of sorts. But it's by no means a deadline of the last call for when you'll be able to sign up for month of action activities or participation. Ivana, do you have anything to add on that from the HHS side?
Just that no action is too big or too small. The tools that have been created are designed so that if you are a neighbor who wants to go door to door, you can have the tools at your disposal, or if you're a national organization and you need help standing up canvases because you've never done that before, we're prepared to equip you with the tools regardless of where you fall on that spectrum.
Thank you. So there's another question for, I think for Ivana. You mentioned what sounds to me like quite a tremendous amount of work and assistance to pull together this list of state contacts. I assume that, I know that's part of the toolkit materials that we previewed. So I think we will plan to make sure that that's included in the follow-up notes you all receive. Ivana, is that is live now, or does that go live as of launch?
I'm sorry, just to make sure that can you repeat the question, Ben? Because I think I want to make sure I understand it.
The list of state contacts,
Oh,
the best way for people to access that.
sorry, I confused myself as to whether you were asking for state contacts or the list of grantees. And anyway, I'm back. So the list of state contacts is live. It is available on wecandothis.hhs.gov. If you go to the toolkits, it's under toolkit for faith and community organizations. I will drop the specific link in the chat so folks see it.
Great, thank you. Nat, there's a question about Mississippi that I think is also relevant for many other locations. Right, I'll give Nat the disclaimer that she's not a data scientist.
I am not a data scientist, but Jamie, I did get your question. I was just sharing my email with you. I can connect you to our data folks just to help unpack some of that. It is, as I understand it, just based on self-reported data, right? But I will, I'll connect you with our data folks and make sure that I get your top lines.
Great, thank you. Ivana, we also have a question about national organizations applying, even though that is, sort of past the deadline on the NOFO. Do you have any tips for national organizations that that are not part of that deadline, but where would they look for funding? Would you direct them to their state at that point?
Yes, I think it's running both courses. Definitely work with affiliates at the state level, but also send an email to the HRSA troubleshooting email address. I will also drop that in the chat, and ask about your specific instance, because it may be that despite being a national organization, your affiliates apply with the national organization supporting. I'm not sure what makes the most sense, but they will be able to offer some guidance on that question.
Great, thank you. Steve Taylor with United Way also noting a number of United Ways around the country are receiving CDC money as well for these efforts. That's certainly excellent to see. Nat, I warned you this was a data curious crowd.
Yeah.
So, some folks are asking about, the changes that we've seen in hesitancy or in acceptance rates, over the last, over whatever, recently. Do you have any insights on that? Have you heard insights on that? Is it just nonprofits?
Yeah.
Nonprofits doing good work?
Unfortunately, I don't feel comfortable talking about any data trends. I will completely mislead y'all. But if there are any specific questions in terms of how specific blocks are moving in your state, I can definitely connect you to our data team. That is the latest that we got from them. So someone was asking, is this any different than 2 weeks ago? Yes, but I'm sure the macros, they remain fairly consistent, obviously, from a day-to-day jump. I know you've heard from us for a couple of days now, but those were based on the latest data points. But if you have any specifics, we have wonderful data folks both at the White House and HHS that can definitely help you unpack some of those questions.
Great, thank you. So, a lot of the questions that we're getting right now are understandably about accessing resources that you all have put a lot of work into developing. And so I want to make sure that, we spend your time as judiciously as possible. Independent sector will commit to making sure that everyone who's with us here gets access to those resources as soon as we have them in distributable format. We'll also, certainly get them posted on our site as part of independent sector's own commitment to this work. So I want to take 1 minute and give our guests an option for any closing comments. Again, we're really grateful for your time today.
Yeah, I will just end with, and I know that there are a lot of questions around this in terms of just the vaccine hesitant community, right? What we have found over and over again is that ultimately local community leaders and health leaders are the best influencers or mobilizers of sorts, right? You'll be surprised at how much, more likely your neighbor is to get vaccinated if you communicate to them that you did and where. And same with like the local health, their doctors, nurses, et cetera, right? So that's the reason why we're putting so much emphasis on this month of action. While the bigger macro events and the influencer events that we'll be hosting are amazing and great and needed for the sake of awareness and narrative, ultimately for us to move this last and very important sectors and sections in our states, the local door-to-door community and organizing as we know is really the best way. So I'll make sure that Ben shares my email if you have any further questions, but ultimately, I'm looking forward to hosting many of these. We are available. We are an open White House, right? If there are any other issues or experts that you want us to bring your way, let Ben know. We're happy to host these and do as many of these as you like. And thank you, Ben and Jeff and Wes and the independent sector team for allowing us to participate today.
And just an aside on funding specifically, it may be that depending on the kind of organization that you are, there are specific dollars tailored to the work you do. I'll use childcare block grants as an example. There are childcare block grants as a result of the American Relief Plan headed to states that will make it so that in many states, they have doubled their public childcare dollars for the first time, maybe since the state's inception. Just significant funding in arenas related to childcare and education. And there are information sessions happening through ACF at HHS, through childcare administrators across the state level that may, for example, be worth tapping into. So if you have specific questions aligned to the work you do, I may not have the answer, but I should be able to get you to people who do. Please do not hesitate me to reach out on those. And just thank you so much for having us, and thank you for all that you've done, for all that you will do. It is an honor to be in partnership with you all. Have a good rest of your week.
Thank you,
Bye, everyone.
Ivana. Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate it. We will now turn to the legislative update portion of our program this afternoon. Wes, are you're like the kicker? We called a couple timeouts there to ice you. Or did we throw you off your game by making you wait? It's good to see you again, Wes, as always. So we'll also be joined towards the end of this conversation by Sally Schaefer and Emily Horowitz, our partners working on Legacy IRA Act and retirement giving incentives as well. Before we do that, Wes, there are developments even this morning within the infrastructure debate that we are all tracking closely in Congress. There have been continued negotiations. Kind of reminds me of the COVID negotiations we saw at the end of last year, where they were really, really far apart, but they did continually tiptoe towards each other. Still a really big gap, but again, recent developments. What can you tell us about what's happening with negotiations on an infrastructure package?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So you're right. So since kind of the passage, in February of the American Relief Plan, as mentioned, the last 3 months have been really focused on infrastructure, and can they put a plan together with, the first out of the gate plans, two plans from President Biden, American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan, with various pieces and components of both those plans in there on the traditional infrastructure portion of that for highways and bridges, transit, et cetera, broadband spending, as well as expanded programs to include childcare, workforce development, et cetera, education. The president's two plans add about $4 trillion in total. The focus last couple of weeks has really been on the American Jobs Plan, the 2.2 trillion or so plan from President Biden put out on the traditional infrastructure portions as well. And so they're kind of going back and forth now in negotiations with Republicans. So President Biden has been eager in trying to get a bipartisan deal. I think it's for a couple reasons. One, for political reasons, to have a bipartisan win under his belt this year, as well as I think there's also recognition that if they try to do a package by themselves, meaning Democrats, to reconciliation, which we'll talk about a little bit, that's not an easy lift to do, both from some technical rules that what can be in and must be taken out of reconciliation bill, as well as some of the more moderate Democrats nervous about doing a plan of that size only with Democrats and want some Republican cover, for example. So kind of where are we today? As you mentioned, Ben, there has been some news, breaking news of late. First, the president earlier this last week came down from his 2.2 trillion plan to 1.7. Republicans have been at about $600 billion. And then this morning, Republicans put out a $928 billion plan, just under $1 trillion, counteroffer to President Biden as part of the bipartisan negotiations. Now, that $928 billion is still pretty far apart from where President Biden is at 1.7 trillion, as well as it does not expand as far as President Biden in the non-traditional or infrastructure portions, childcare, et cetera, and things that we would have been looking to get in that package, and really mostly focuses just on highways, transit, roads and bridges, as well as it does include broadband, a good portion of broadband infrastructure spending, which is also very positive. So the president has tried to have a deadline of next week to get a deal together. I think there has been some openness to reaching agreement. Obviously, the number is still far apart between the two. There has been some, as I understand it, positive indications from the Democrats in the White House to the Republican plan, given that they're now moving higher, but not to where I think Democrats want to be on a number. The other issue has been always a sticking point is how do you pay for it? The president has put out a number of tax increases to raise the corporate tax rate and other corporate tax changes that help pay for his plan. The Republicans have been adamant against raising taxes other than possibly expanding some user fees, maybe a vehicle miles tax for electric vehicles, since they don't pay the gasoline tax, the current funding mechanism for the Highway Trust Fund. So they're still far apart on the pay for aspect of it. There was yesterday a bipartisan bill that passed out of the EPW committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee in the Senate, for about $303 billion in highway spending. That's only the highway portion of the package that passed out on a bipartisan basis. And so there is some positive movement there, but nothing on the grand size of the package. So, unless the president and Democrats quickly reject the Republican plan today, I expect there's going to be some more conversations into next week, see if they can reach some sort of agreement on a bipartisan package. As you know, Speaker Pelosi has indicated they want to have something done through the House by July 4th. So really, the month of June is the kind of the key time to move something if they can. Obviously, the real deadline here is September 30th, which is when the Highway Trust Fund authorizations expired. So, there is no short deadline. They do have some time here. So that kind of gives me the ability, the thought that they can drag this negotiation out a little bit longer. I'm sure you'll see some Democrats in the press being impatient with Republicans and say, whenever you get an agreement, let's just cut it and move on our own. I think there's still some room for them to negotiate and some talk some more about where they want to be. That's kind of, I think, where things are on the infrastructure negotiations. Tomorrow, we will see the president's budget release come out. Understands about a $6 trillion overall budget package with a lot of spending items, including infrastructure and American Families Plan that he put out previously. We'll see some more details there as part of that, as well as details on the tax increases that he has proposed to offset a lot of that new spending. And that will really kick off the annual appropriations process that also has a deadline of September 30th. So we'll probably start to see the House, first off, probably not the Senate, but the House, to begin to move some appropriations bills in the month of June and July going forward. So that's obviously also kicking the process going. The last thing I'll say is, if they do not reach an agreement on a bipartisan infrastructure package, then we expect the Democrats to move a package on their own, probably through reconciliation, which is the vehicle they can use to pass on a partisan, somewhat majority basis with the House and the Senate. There is some technical issues with that. It can't contain provisions that don't have a budget impact, and so the provision does not have a spending or tax impact. They cannot be in the bill. So that poses some problems for some of the infrastructure and climate and energy provisions they want to put in the package. That makes it difficult for them to get everything they want in there. But it's a vehicle for them to do it on a more partisan basis. And that really then puts the leverage in the hands of people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and some of the more moderate Democrats, because give them their votes are needed to pass the package in the Senate on a 50-50 tie. So I'll stop there and happy to kind of answer any questions or
excellent. Thank you, Wes. Lots we could dig into there, and I do want to turn to questions. As we do this, I'd also note that on some issues that the nonprofit sector is tracking closely, issues like broadband, there have been some issues specific, developments, machinations as well. So Vice President Harris met with a number of congressional advocates for broadband funding yesterday, and that did include the Representative Clyburn and Senator Klobuchar, who are the House and Senate co-leads on very expansive broadband legislation that I know a number of us in the nonprofit sector have been pushing for. I don't have a download from how that meeting went, but we're certainly encouraged that that they're in the room at that table. So Wes, one question for you. In addition to the broadband conversation, we've seen some issue-specific bipartisan work happening, specifically in the Senate on a highway bill, and we've seen, there are negotiations around workforce, a key priority for a lot of us. How do those bipartisan issue-specific efforts potentially feed into the larger package? I think we know those issue-specific things, are probably not going to get enacted on their own. How do they factor in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the bipartisan provisions find their way in. There's two alternatives, right? Is the bipartisan package or a more partisan package? Now, there's going to be a bipartisan package. I think the negotiation is around a smaller number, and so I think those provisions make it in, just probably get scaled back a bit in order to accommodate the smaller overall number they're going to agree to, right? Whether it's $928 billion, or if they find a $1.2 trillion compromise or something like that, it's going to be smaller than what the president has. And so I think they find their way in there, but they're just a little bit smaller in size. If the Democrats then move a package on their own, then I would expect them to move something much larger than the $928 billion Republican package, and something closer to the $1.7 trillion package that the president put on the table as the last offer. In that case, then we'll have probably those provisions would make their way in the bill, but then written by Democrats, and so probably a little more to the side of what the Democrats want to see, probably a little more funding, et cetera, in that package. But I think that those provisions have broadband, et cetera, workforce have a good landing spot in either scenario. Just a matter of how much. funding they actually get.
Great. And sticking on this package, a question from our good friend Sarah Dobson at Lutheran Services about whether there's home and community-based services funding in the new Republican plan. I guess, Wes, that's a broader question for you. Has that plan been released publicly yet, or have they just leaked, kind of top line and a couple pieces of it?
Yeah, I haven't seen the memo they sent to the White House this morning, but the details have leaked out. 500 billion for roads and bridges, 100 billion for transit, passenger and rail, freight rail, ports and waterways, airports, etc. Not sure the number on broadband, but the Republicans have basically also taken the view that infrastructure needs to be more narrowly defined and not include those more expansive definitions, and so I would not expect them to have that in their package. Now, if we get a bipartisan deal, then I would imagine Democrats will bring some of those things into the package to include. But like I said, not as large as what the Democrats want out front. That's really part of the issue here, is that Republicans have been trying to keep the definition of infrastructure more narrowly focused and targeted, and Democrats want to expand it to include other things, to include things we want. And so hopefully they'll be able to find a way to get a bipartisan deal or a bigger deal that includes more than just the roads and bridges section of what the Republicans are asking for.
Thank you. And so last question that I have for you, Wes, before we turn to Sally and to Emily. You read the president's budget comes out tomorrow. There are a lot of, it's a president's budget. There are a lot of different pieces in it that matter a lot to many of us. We expect it will present kind of the full scope of his vision. We've also, many of us, been working hard to raise alarm about a proposal to cap the value of all itemized deductions, including the charitable deduction. And we've received, kind of varying signals about what to expect on that front tomorrow. So I guess I would draw your attention and others to an article we've seen in the Post this morning that does contain mention that the president's budget will, not contain significant new spending proposals that people aren't expecting, that it will, largely echo a lot of what's been released, and that at least on the healthcare front, this article notes that there are some campaign promises that the budget will not include this time around. Those of us who are hoping that they also, set to the side one of their other campaign pledges around this 28% cap, might take encouragement from that. So, Wes, do you have any previously secret details on that front that you would now like to leak publicly?
Well, I think that, as you mentioned, we did have some good productive conversation with the Treasury Department officials on that 20% cap, and kind of made the case as to why it shouldn't include charitable deduction, the charitable contributions. And I think I want to wait till I see the final version of the green book that comes out tomorrow, but my understanding is that they will not include the 20% cap in the president's budget when released tomorrow. So don't want to be 100% until I see the final language, and so nothing's final in this town. But I think that we'll be hopefully pleasantly surprised, or pleasantly surprised to see what's in there.
Great, thank you for that. I know we ask you to read a lot of tea leaves, so I always appreciate your honest guesses. So with the disclaimer that we certainly don't know, at least the potential for a significant advocacy victory for the nonprofit sector. Speaking of significant advocacy victories for the nonprofit sector, Sally Schaefer and Emily Horowitz at American Heart Association have been working closely with a whole coalition, certainly including independent sector, on an effort to expand giving incentives for some Americans who are retired from their retirement accounts. Again, we've all been working closely on this, and appreciate Sally and Emily joining us to share an update from earlier this month and ongoing about this work. Sally, Emily, over to you.
Thanks, Ben. Emily, do you want to
Thanks,
kick us
Ben.
off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Horowitz, Government Relations Manager for the American Heart Association, and I'm joined by Sally Schaefer, Principal of Uncorked Advocates and Consultant to the Heart Association. I wasn't able to join in on video today, so unfortunately I don't get to see all of your faces. And thanks again to Ben and the whole IS team for allowing me and Sally to speak with you a little bit today about the Legacy IRA Act, which is a bipartisan bill which would incentivize charitable giving, particularly from middle-income seniors, which we're seeing is more important than ever, as many nonprofits over the last year have been facing an increased demand for services, while at the same time working with decreased giving. Sally in a minute is going to go over some of the nuts and bolts of the bill, but I'll preface it by saying that we really see this as another option for seniors looking to give to charities by expanding the current IRA charitable rollover. And it's something that we're hearing from our planned giving staff, what they're seeing and hearing from prospective donors, that there's a missed opportunity. And so this is an opportunity for us to change some legislation and allow nonprofits to work with these seniors who have charitable intent in order to give these legacy gifts. So the Heart Association coordinates the Legacy IRA Coalition, which is comprised of more than 50 national nonprofits, including many independent sector members. And as Ben alluded to, the bill is gaining traction in both the House and the Senate as part of the bipartisan Secure 2.0 package. And again, I'll go into more details on that in a minute, but we are feeling very optimistic and hope to get this across the finish line this Congress. So I'll pass it over to Sally for now to share some more details.
Thanks, Emily. And I'm conscious of time, so I know we'll keep this to 5 minutes or less, but we had such a great vote in the House recently. We thought the momentum and the action was worth sharing with this group. So some of you have been partners in this for the last few years, like independent sector, and for others, this may be a new issue. So we just wanted to give a quick overview. Obviously, in current laws, the IRA charitable rollover that allows seniors to give up to $100,000 directly to charity from traditional individual retirement accounts. And we've seen about 70% increase in these kinds of gifts in the last few years. So it is a growing area of philanthropy. And Free Will, which does a study the last 3 years on this kind of giving, from their 2020 study that was recently released, the average gift is about $7,600. And I think it's important to flag that about 30% of this giving comes from new donors last year. That was up 9%. So as a lot of nonprofits can share from their fundraising last year, there was uneven giving, but this is an area of growth. So we're excited that we've been working on this legislation with American Heart leading in partnership with independent sector and the other partners to expand this IRA charitable rollover. Just by looking at the demographics, it makes sense for us. 10,000 baby boomers turning 70 every day, with trillions of assets in their individual retirement accounts. And I don't know if when you talk to your fundraisers, but generally across the board, most charities, 40% of their donor base are seniors. So it is an opportunity to grow gifts from middle income seniors who have that charitable intent but need retirement income. So just to really quickly overview, we've been pushing the Legacy IRA Act, and in this chart that you see, the Senate legislation is our model bill, which would lower the age to 65, open the door to allow split interest entity gifts up to $400,000. It would increase the IRA charitable rollover from $100,000 to $130,000. And you could make these gifts every year, and it would be permanent and effective immediately. Why we're very excited is in the House Ways and Means Committee, they had a markup mid-May, and they did include a modified version of this Legacy IRA Act, which is bipartisan, passed unanimously out of Ways and Means. I don't know what else we can say about that. What other models are out there now, not infrastructure, but we have this retirement package that keeps the age at 70 and a half, but opens split interest entities like a charitable gift annuity, many of you are familiar with, up to $50,000. It does index the IRA charitable rollover. And while you can continue to make rollover gifts every year, this new split interest gift opportunity would be only one time only. But again, it's permanent, effective immediately. And where we are now is the Senate is planning to have their hearing on the retirement package this summer with a markup this fall. So we feel really great about the opportunity for this to get across the finish line. And we are pushing, obviously, the model legislation, but excited that the floor seems to be what was included in the House package, which I think would still be a great giving opportunity. And just want to say thank you so much to our charitable partners on this. We're up to 55 national groups. So if you don't see your name or you're not familiar with this bill, our information is on the screen. And I know Ben has both Emily and my contact information, but we have a lot of advocacy resources on the site. And again, just want to say thanks to independent sector. And Emily, is there anything I missed in my 5 minutes or less, coming up on 12:59?
Thanks, Sally. I'll just add, we really appreciate the charitable partners we've been working with over the last several years on this across a variety of sectors. Of course, we have the Heart Association and other health groups, but also arts groups, community groups, really running the gambit. And would love to have your support. If you're not already a member of our coalition, feel free to reach out to myself, Sally, or Ben can put you in touch with us. And if you have questions about how this might help your organization, we can give you some resources to share with your fundraisers and plan giving staff to see what kind of numbers this might help you with. So thank you.
Thank you both. We will give, if anyone has a question about this specifically, we do have a minute for a question. As we wait on that, I'll just say that that coalition that Sally and Emily mentioned is growing. We've been really pleased to add a few new folks to that coalition lately. Come on in, water's fine. This is your chance to get on board before we hopefully get a win. So I have one question, Sally, Emily. We've seen, I think in our conversations with Ways and Means staff, not just agreement, but real commitment. They certainly made a real investment of their limited dollars when they put this provision in the bill, made it effective immediately. We've got I think a very committed champion in the Senate as well. Do you think that commitment from Mr. Kramer and Mrs. Stabenow is obviously going to be key for us to get this across the finish line? Thoughts on where that lies?
Yeah, I mean, I can start and Emily fill in any gaps. I should have mentioned our Senate leads are Senator Kramer, a North Dakota Republican, and Senator Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, who is the #2 Democrat on the committee. And we have a couple sponsors on Senate Finance who've already weighed in and said, we want to see this on the list in the package. And those members include Senator Debbie Stabenow, who has said this is her one and only request on the retirement package to the chairman. On the Republican side, Senator Daines and Senator Cornyn are both co-sponsors, and both have weighed in with their side of the aisle. So yeah, we feel good about our champions on the legislation, and we do have a few more senators off committee, but those are the ones who, don't tell them, but those are the ones who count in this process and this exercise.
Thank you for highlighting that.
And I'll just quickly add, on the House side, we've also seen a high level of commitment during the markup on the Secure 2.0 package. I believe it was Ranking Member Neal who mentioned the bill in his opening remarks. And so, or did I say Neal? Oh, I don't have my notes in front of me, but it was either the chair or the ranking member who referenced the bill in their opening remarks as celebrating this was included in the package. So we are seeing that support, both sides of the aisle, both sides of Congress.
Great. Again, thank you both. Thank you, Wes. Denise Harlow, we will certainly put you in touch with Sally and Emily. Thank you. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Emily. And again, a thank you to our guests from the White House and HHS. who have departed from the program, but we're really grateful to all of you as well for joining us for this legislative and this advocacy effort, and for helping advance this critical cause of vaccine access over the next month. So much of the potential for reclaiming a lot of our lives hinges on this. And I know that the nation and the sector really appreciate everyone's work on it. We look forward to staying in touch in the days and weeks to come. Thank you again. Have a good afternoon.